Now, welcome to what I'm going to call a Star Wars discussion, which basically means no script or anything, just me responding to a topic or a question that I've been asked. And this time I'm going to respond to a question that a good friend of mine actually asked me a few days ago. And he asked, what is my favorite Star Wars movie? And he was kind of surprised when I said Return of the Jedi. And I've gone over the reasons before why that is my favorite. I do love the movie as is, but it is the first Star Wars movie I remember seeing. I saw it in the theater when I was 5 years old. And some almost 40 years later at this point, I can still remember that experience. It has stuck with me all these years, and hence, that is a big reason why it is my favorite. Anyway, he was surprised with my answer and figured everybody's favorite Star Wars movie who was a Star Wars fan is The Empire Strikes Back. And I told him, well, it's not my favorite, but I think Empire is probably the best Star Wars film. And when he kind of was confused by that, I pointed out that just because you have a favorite team in a professional sport doesn't necessarily mean they are the best team in that professional sport. It's kind of the same thing here. You can recognize something is better, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to like it more. And so to follow this up, he asked me, well, why is The Empire Strikes Back considered the best by so many fans? Not necessarily all fans. I'm sure some people out there think that one of the other movies is better, and that's fine. But it does seem to be the general consensus that Empire is the best, and why is that the case? And at the time, I just kind of gave him a generic answer, but I really stopped and thought about it, and I asked, why is Empire Strikes Back usually considered the best Star Wars movie? And before really getting into it, I know there are some people that say Empire has not always been considered the best, that back in the day when it originally came out, that a lot of fans or a lot of people and critics did not like it. And I've seen people point to reviews at the time saying, well, look, this critic thought it was this and that. And to be completely honest, there's really no way to know what people initially thought of it, because a lot of it is going to depend on, of course, your point of view. If you're someone who is old enough to remember seeing it back in the day and you loved it, you're probably going to get the impression that everybody else loved it too. And, just because the critics say, if you can point out some critic reviews that say it wasn't the best film, or a lot of them, that doesn't mean much either, considering we can look at a film like The Last Jedi, which has amazing critical reviews, and yet, well, if you look at the fan base, they are completely divided. And if you ask a certain side of the fan base if that is a good movie or not, you are going to get a radically different answer. And they're going to tell you that the other side is a minority who doesn't like it or does like it. So, again, it is impossible to know what the sort of general consensus behind that film was when it first came out. And I'm speaking of The Empire Strikes Back. Anyway, I think one of the main reasons why The Empire Strikes Back is so beloved and why it was such a great film is it didn't make the mistake that so many sequels tend to make, which is that it didn't try to do what originally worked, only bigger and better, if you will. It didn't say, well, okay, so this is what people loved about the first Star Wars movie. Let's do that again, and let's add this and make it even more extravagant. And one of the best examples I can think of a film that kind of does this would be The Matrix. There were certain things in The Matrix that worked extremely well. People loved the special effects. They loved some of the, mystery and intrigue behind it. And so what the sequel did was take all of those things that people love and just try to inflate it. They tried to do the same sort of thing, again, only bigger and better and more spectacular. It was more spectacle over substance. And that, I think, is the biggest issue or the biggest problem sequels usually face. They go for the spectacle over substance, and that is exactly the opposite of what The Empire Strikes Back did. If I asked you what is the plot of The Empire Strikes Back, you might pause and ask yourself, well, what exactly is the plot of that film? What exactly does happen in that film? What is the story beneath it all? And it's basically just Vader looking for Luke and finding him and trying to turn him to the dark side, and he escapes. That is basically the premise or what happens in that film. There is no grander overarching story. I mean, yes, there is. The Empire, of course, strikes back and it finds the rebel base and kind of, throws everything into disarray. But the story is really just this story about Luke, what does he do next? What is he supposed to do now without Obi-Wan? He goes and finds Yoda, he begins his training, and then he's lured away from that and faces Vader and has his whole world thrown upside down. What the film doesn't do is say, well, people really seem to respond to the trench run at the end of the first film. They seem to respond to lightsaber battles, even though if we look back now, the battle between Vader and Kenobi in A New Hope is pretty timid compared to what we've gotten elsewhere. Still, at the time, it was cool to see, well, lightsabers, a fight with lightsabers. That was something radical and new and unique. And so what The Empire Strikes Back doesn't do is say, well, these are the things that worked. These are the things that people responded to. Let's give them more of that. Let's have lots of lightsabers in there. Let's have tons of space battles. And the funny thing about, The Empire Strikes Back is the big battle actually takes place in the first act of the film. It's almost like, yeah, let's get that thing that everybody expects to happen in this movie. Let's get it out of the way. Let's get the epic fight done with so we can get to the substance of the film, which is exploring these characters, which is why Empire Strikes Back is the greatest of the Star Wars films, in my opinion. They took all these characters that people really loved and responded to in the first film and challenged them in incredibly unique ways. It didn't just say, again, let's just focus on that spectacle. Let's really dive into these characters. Let's make it a story about the characters. And don't get me wrong, the first Star Wars film is good because it is about the characters. It sets these very kind of grounded and relatable characters in this fantastic setting. And so you're interested in the setting, yet at the same time you're interested in the story, and you're just captivated by the whole thing, and you just go along for the ride. That is the brilliance of the first Star Wars film, and I'm getting off topic since I'm supposed to be talking about the second one. But the brilliance of the first Star Wars film is it is incredibly relatable. The characters are incredibly relatable in this fantastic setting, and the story just goes at the perfect pace, and it's exciting, and there is spectacle in it, but it's not necessarily about the spectacle, which again is why The Empire Strikes Back works so well. It's not about the spectacle, it was about the characters, which is what worked in the first film. So in a way, yes, you could argue that it did learn from that first film, and it does do what worked in that first film and does it better. But again, so often what sequels tend to be is not about characters, it's about the superficial stuff that worked in the first film and running with it. There are, of course, a lot of other things that work extremely well in this film. There are a lot of subversions of expectations, such as Yoda turning out to be the great warrior and Grand Master Jedi that Luke is looking for. Nobody, I think, expects that when we first encounter this little guy, this little creature on the side of the road, which is part of the hero's journey. Then there is also the biggest reveal or biggest twist, arguably, in the history of film, which is Vader being Luke's father. Then there is the romance between Han and Leia and how that is just handled beautifully and perfectly right down to the "I love you, I know" line. It is subtle, it is not in your face. You believe these two characters are slowly but surely falling in love, unlike in a different Star Wars trilogy where it is very in your face and very overt, and they are telling each other how much they are falling in love with each other. The Force, I think, is handled extremely well in this film. Yes, we learn more about it, yet it keeps its mystery to the fullest. We don't learn enough that we begin to unravel that mystery. It still feels like this completely mystical thing that we could never fully understand. And we can certainly debate and talk about what the prequels do to the Force. Does that make it worse to learn about things such as midichlorians, or is that just a natural progression of the story to learn more and more about this underlying principle? I think that is a fascinating topic for another time. Then there are these little things that maybe add context without you even realizing it, or maybe a little bit of flavor as well. Things like at the very start of the film when Han and Luke are on Tauntaun and they're setting sensors around Echo Base, and Luke contacts Han and says, "Han, old buddy, do you read me?" Which implies these two have developed a real friendship since the last time we saw them, that things have happened since the last time we saw them, that they've been together, that they have discovered Hoth and, all these other things, and that, Han later on mentions the bounty hunter they ran into on Ord Mantell. And so little things like that, I think, are another brilliant part of this film, that they give you the impression that other things do happen, that yes, we focus on these characters, but these characters do other things and other things happen in this galaxy. That's one of the things I love about Star Wars, is it does feel like this living, breathing galaxy. Because it's not only this film, the other Star Wars films as well do these little mentions to other things that happen off screen. Anyway, I'm getting to that point where I feel like I'm rambling, so I'll try to summarize by saying that what I think works so well about The Empire Strikes Back is that it doesn't make the mistake that so many sequels make. It doesn't try to go bigger. It doesn't try to take the things that worked and just extrapolate them onto the next film and inflate them. It takes the subtle thing that worked about that first film. It takes the characters and it goes on a smaller, more personable journey with them. It challenges each and every one of these characters in ways we would have never imagined them being challenged. And it does it in a way that is very gripping. We are on the edge of our seats when we are watching that battle between Luke and Vader, when we learn that he is his father. We feel terrible for Leia when Han is frozen in carbonite. It invokes emotions because it focuses so well on these characters, and yet it still captures that magic of this fantastic setting around it. And again, we get more about the Force, but it remains this very mysterious and vague thing. And so for me, it ends up being not only nearly a perfect Star Wars film, but nearly a perfect film, about as close as you're ever going to get, especially in something like a space opera or space fantasy like Star Wars is. And though it may not be my favorite Star Wars movie, for better or worse, I think it will always remain the best Star Wars movie. Well, that's all I've got for this time, and hopefully you enjoyed this video, hopefully you enjoyed my rambling, and if you've made it this far, that probably means you did. So what I'm going to do is I will pin a comment below asking for questions or topics to discuss just like this, assuming of course you did enjoy it and want more of it. Either way, let me know what you think about what I said or why you think The Empire Strikes Back is or isn't the best Star Wars film. Whatever you believe, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.